Chapter 5, Part 5 of Melmoth the Wanderer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin, Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Melmoth the Wanderer by Charles Robert Maturin. Chapter 5, Part 5. After these lines several were unintelligible to me, apparently from the agitation under which they were written. The precipitancy and fiery ardor of my brother's character communicated itself to his writings. After many a defaced page, I could trace the following words. It was singular enough that you, who were the object of my inveterate hatred before my residence in the convent, became the object of my interest from that moment. I had adopted your cause from pride. I now upheld it from experience. Compassion, instinct, whatever it was, began to assume the character of a duty. When I saw the indignity with which the lower classes were treated, I said to myself, "No, he shall never suffer that. He is my brother." When I succeeded in my exercises and was applauded, I said, "This is applause in which he never can share." When I was punished, and that was much more frequently, I said, "He shall never feel this mortification." My imagination expanded. I believed myself your future patron. I conceived myself redeeming the injustice of nature, aiding and aggrandizing you, forcing you to confess that you owed more to me than to your parents, and throwing myself with a disarmed and naked heart on your gratitude alone for affection. I heard you call me brother. I bid you stop, and call me benefactor. My nature, proud, generous, and fiery, had not yet quite emancipated itself from the influence of the director, but every effort it made pointed, by an indescribable impulse, towards you. Perhaps the secret of this is to be found in the elements of my character, which always struggled against dictation, and loved to teach itself all it wished to know, and inspire itself with the object of its own attachments. It is certain that I wished for your friendship. At the moment I was instructed to hate you. Your mild eyes and affectionate looks haunted me perpetually in the convent. To the professions of friendship repeatedly made me by the boarders, I answered, "I want a brother." My conduct was eccentric and violent. No wonder, for my conscience had begun to operate against my habits. Sometimes I would apply with an eagerness that made them tremble for my health. At others, no punishment, however severe, could make me submit to the ordinary discipline of the house. The community grew weary of my obstinacy, violence, and irregularities. They wrote to the director to have me removed, but before this could be accomplished, I was seized with a fever. They paid me unremitting attention, but there was something on my mind no cares of theirs could remove. When they brought me medicine with the most scrupulous punctuality, I said, "Let my brother fetch it, and if it be poison I will drink it from his hand. I have injured him much." When the bell tolled for matins and vespers, I said, "Are they going to make my brother a monk?" The director promised me differently, but you are all deceivers. At length they muffled the bell. I heard its stifled sound, and I exclaimed, "You are tolling for his funeral, but I am his murderer." The community became terrified at these exclamations so often repeated, and with the meaning of which they could not accuse themselves. I was removed in a state of delirium to my father's palace in Madrid. A figure like yours sat beside me in the carriage, alighted when we stopped, accompanied me where I remained, assisted me when I was placed again in the carriage. So vivid was the impression that I was accustomed to say to the attendants, "Stop, my brother is assisting me." When they asked me in the morning how I had rested, I answered, "Very well. Alonso has been all night at my bedside." I invited this visionary companion to continue his attentions, and when the pillows were arranged to my satisfaction, would say, "How kind my brother is, how useful, but why will he not speak?" At one stage I absolutely refused nourishment, because the phantom appeared to decline it. I said, "Do not urge me, my brother, you see, will not accept of it." "Oh, I entreat his pardon. It is a day of abstinence, that is his reason. You see how he points to his habit." That is enough. It is very singular that the food at this house happened to be poisoned, and that 2 of my attendants died of partaking of it before they could reach Madrid. I mention these circumstances merely to prove the riveted hold you had taken both on my imagination and my affections. On the recovery of my intellect, my first inquiry was for you. This had been foreseen, and my father and mother, shunning the discussion and even trembling for the event, as they knew the violence of my temper, entrusted the whole business to the director. He undertook it. How he executed it is yet to be seen. On our first meeting, he approached me with congratulations on my convalescence, with regrets for the constraints I must have suffered in the convent, with assurances that my parents would make my home a paradise. When he had gone on for some time, I said, "What have you done with my brother?" "He is in the bosom of God," said the director, crossing himself. I understood him in a moment. I rushed past him before he had finished. "Where are you going, my son?" "To my parents." "Your parents? It is impossible that you can see them now." "But it is certain that I will see them. Dictate to me no longer, degrade yourself not by this prostituted humiliation." For he was putting himself in a posture of entreaty. "I will see my parents. Procure for me an introduction to them this moment, or tremble for the continuance of your influence in the family." At these words he trembled. He did not indeed dread my influence, but he dreaded my passions. His own lessons were bitterly retaliated on him that moment. He had made me fierce and impetuous because that suited his purpose, but he had neither calculated on, or prepared himself for, this extraordinary direction which my feelings had taken, so opposite to that which he had labored to give them. He thought in exciting my passions he could ascertain their direction. Woe be to those who, in teaching the elephant to direct his trunk against their foes, forget that by a sudden convolution of that trunk he may rend the driver from his back and trample him under his feet into the mire. Such was the director's situation and mine. I insisted on going instantly to my father's presence. He interposed. He supplicated, at last, as a hopeless resource. He reminded me of his continual indulgence, his flattery of my passions. My answer was brief, but oh, that it might sink into the souls of such tutors and such priests! And that has made me what I am. Lead the way to my father's apartment, or I will spurn you before me to the door of it. At this threat, which he saw I was able to execute, for you know my frame is athletic, and my stature twice that of his, he trembled, and I confess this indication of both physical and mental debility completed my contempt for him. He crawled before me to the apartment where my father and mother were seated, in a balcony that overlooked the garden. They had imagined all was settled, and were astonished to see me rush in, followed by the director, with an aspect that left them no reason to hope of an auspicious result of our conference. The director gave them a sign which I did not observe, and which they had not time to profit by, and as I stood before them, livid from my fever, on fire with passion, and trembling with inarticulate expressions, they shuddered. Some looks of reproach were levelled at them by the director, which he returned as usual by signs. I did not understand them, but I made them understand me in a moment. I said to my father, "Señor, is it true you have made my brother a monk?" My father hesitated. At last he said, "I thought the director had been commissioned to speak to you on that subject." "Father, what has a director to do in the concerns of a parent and child? That man can never be a parent, never can have a child. How then can he be a judge in a case like this?" "You forget yourself. You forget the respect due to a minister of the church." "My father, I am but just raised from a deathbed. My mother and you trembled for my life. That life still depends on your words. I promised submission to this wretch, on a condition that he has violated, which—" "Command yourself, sir," said my father, in a tone of authority which ill suited the trembling lips it issued from, "or quit the apartment." "Señor," interposed the director, in a softened tone, "let not me be the cause of dissension in a family whose happiness and honor have been always my object next to the interests of the church. Let him go on, The remembrance of my crucified master will sustain me under his insults." And he crossed himself. "Wretch!" I cried, grasping his habit, "you are a hypocrite, a deceiver, and I know not what violence I might have been guilty, but my father interposed. My mother shrieked with terror, and a scene of confusion followed, in which I recollect nothing but the hypocritical exclamations of the director, appearing to struggle between my father and me, while he mediated with God for both. He repeated incessantly, "Signor, do not interpose. Every indignity I suffer, I make a sacrifice to heaven. It will qualify me to be an intercessor for my traducer with God." And, crossing himself, he called on the most sacred names, and exclaimed, "Let insults, calumnies, and blows be added to that preponderance of merit which is already weighed in the scales of heaven against my offences." And he dared to mix the claims of the intercession of the saints, the purity of the Immaculate Virgin, and even the blood and agony of Jesus Christ with the vile submissions of his own hypocrisy. The room was by this time filled with attendants. My mother was conveyed away, still shrieking with terror. My father, who loved her, was driven by this spectacle, and by my outrageous conduct, to a pitch of fury. He drew his sword. I burst into a laugh that froze his blood as he approached me. I expanded my arms and presented my breast, exclaiming, "Strike! This is the consummation of monastic power. It begun by violating nature and ends in filicide. Strike! Give a glorious triumph to the influence of the Church, and add to the merits of the holy director. You have sacrificed your Esau, your firstborn already. Let Jacob be your next victim." My father retreated from me, and revolted by the disfigurement which the violence of my agitation had caused almost to convulsion, he exclaimed, "Demon!" and stood at a distance, viewing and shuddering at me. "And who has made me so? He who fostered my evil passions for his own purposes? And, because one generous impulse breaks out on the side of nature, would represent or drive me mad, to effectuate his purposes. My father, I see the whole power and system of nature reversed, by the arts of a corrupt ecclesiastic. By his means, my brother has been imprisoned for life. By his means, our birth has been made a curse to my mother and you. What have we had in the family since his influence was fatally established in it, but dissension and misery? Your sword was pointed against my heart this moment. Was it nature or a monk that armed a parent against his child, whose crime was interceding for his brother? Dismiss this man, whose presence eclipses our hearts, and let us confer together for a moment as father and son. And if I do not humiliate myself before you, spurn me forever. My father, for God's sake examine the difference between this man and me as we stand before you. We are together at the bar of your heart. Judge between us. A dry and featureless image of selfish power, consecrated by the name of the Church, occupies his whole soul. I plead to you by the interests of nature, that must be sincere because they are contrary to my own. He only wishes to wither your soul. I seek to touch it. Is his heart in what he says? Does he shed a tear? Does he employ one impassioned expression? He calls on God, while I call only on you. The very violence which you justly condemn is not only my vindication but my eulogy. They who prefer their cause to themselves need no proof of their advocacy being sincere. You aggravate your crime by laying it on another. You have always been violent, obstinate, and rebellious. But who has made me so? Ask himself. Ask this shameful scene in which his duplicity has driven me to act such a part. If you wish to show submission, give me the first proof of it by promising never to torture me by renewing the mention of this subject. Your brother's fate is decided. Promise not to utter his name again, and— "Never! Never!" I exclaimed. "Never will I violate my conscience by such a vow. And his who could propose it must be seared beyond the power of heaven to touch it." Yet in uttering these words I knelt to my father, but he turned from me. I turned in despair to the director. I said, "If you are the minister of heaven, prove the truth of your commission. Make peace in a distracted family. Reconcile my father to both his children. You can effect this by a word, you know you can, yet you will not utter it. My unfortunate brother was not so inflexible to your appeals, and yet were they inspired by a feeling as justifiable as mine. I had offended the director beyond all forgiveness, I knew this, and spoke indeed rather to expose than to persuade him. I did not expect an answer from him, and I was not disappointed. He did not utter a word. I knelt in the middle of the floor between them. I cried, "Deserted by my father and by you, I yet appeal to heaven. I call on it to witness my vow never to abandon my persecuted brother, whom I have been made a tool to betray. I know you have power, I defy it. I know every art of circumvention, of imposture, of malignant industry. Every resource of earth and hell will be set at work against me. I take heaven to witness against you, and demand only its aid to ensure my victory." My father had lost all patience. He desired the attendants to rise and remove me by force. This mention of force, so repugnant to my habits of imperious indulgence, operated fatally on intellects scarcely recovering from delirium, and too strongly tried in the late struggle. I relapsed into partial insanity. I said wildly, "My father, you know not how mild, generous, and forgiving is the being you thus persecute. I owe my life to him. Ask your domestics if he did not attend me, step by step, during my journey, if he did not administer my food, my medicines, and smooth the pillows on which I was supported." "You rave!" cried my father as he heard this wild speech, but he cast a look of fearful inquiry on the attendants. The trembling servants swore, one and all, as well they might, that not a human being but themselves had been suffered to approach me since I quitted the convent, till my arrival at Madrid. The small remains of reason forsook me completely at this declaration, which was however true every word of it. I gave the lie to the last speaker with my utmost fury. I struck those who were next to me. My father, astonished at my violence, suddenly exclaimed, "He is mad!" The director, who had till then been silent, instantly caught the word and repeated, "He is mad." The servants, half in terror, half in conviction, re-echoed the cry. I was seized, dragged away, and this violence, which always excited corresponding violence in me, realized all my father feared, and the director wished for. I behaved just as a boy, scarce out of fever, and still totally delirious, might be supposed to behave. In my apartment I tore down the hangings, and there was not a porcelain vase in the room that I did not dash at their heads. When they seized me, I bit their hands. When at length they were compelled to bind me, I gnawed the strings, and finally snapped them by a violent effort. In fact, I completely realized all the hopes of the director. I was confined to my apartment for several days. During this time, I recovered the only powers that usually revive in a state of isolation, those of inflexible resolution and profound dissimulation. I had soon exercise enough for both of them. On the 12th day of my confinement a servant appeared at the door of my apartment, and, bowing profoundly, announced that if my health was recovered, my father wished to see me. I bowed in complete imitation of his mechanical movements, and I followed him with the steps of a statue. I found my father, armed with the director at his side. He advanced and addressed me with an abruptness which proved that he forced himself to speak. He hurried over a few expressions of pleasure at my recovery, and then said, "Have you reflected on the subject of our last conversation?" "I have reflected on it? I had time to do so." "And you have employed that time well?" "I hope so." "Then the result will be favorable to the hopes of your family, and the interests of the Church." The last words chilled me a little, but I answered as I ought. In a few moments after the director joined me. He spoke amicably, and turned the conversation on neutral topics. I answered him. What an effort did it cost me! Yet I answered him in all the bitterness of extorted politeness. All went on well, however. The family appeared gratified by my renovation. My father, harassed out, was content to procure peace on any terms. My mother, still weaker from the struggles between her conscience and the suggestions of the director, wept, and said she was happy. A month has now elapsed in profound but treacherous peace on all sides. They think me subdued, but in fact the efforts of the director's power in the family would alone be sufficient to precipitate my determinations. He has placed you in a convent, but that is not enough for the persevering proselytism of the Church. The palace of the Duc de Monçada is, under his influence, turned into a convent itself. My mother is almost a nun. Her whole life is exhausted in imploring forgiveness for a crime for which the director, to secure his own influence, orders her a new penance every hour. My father rushes from libertinism to austerity. He vacillates between this world and the next, in the bitterness of exasperated feeling, sometimes reproaches my mother, and then joins her in the severest penance. Must there not be something very wrong in the religion which thus substitutes external severities for internal amendment? I feel I am of an inquiring spirit. If I could obtain a book they call the Bible, which, though they say it contains the words of Jesus Christ, they never permit us to see, I think—but no matter. The very domestics have assumed the in ordine ad spiritualia character already. They converse in whispers, they cross themselves when the clock strikes, they dare to talk, even in my hearing, of the glory which will redound to God and the Church by the sacrifice my father may yet be induced to make of his family to its interests. My fever has abated. I have not lost a moment in consulting your interests. I have heard that there is a possibility of your reclaiming your vows, that is, as I have been told, of declaring they were extorted under impressions of fraud and terror. Observe me, Alonso. I would rather see you rot in a convent than behold you stand forth as a living witness of our mother's shame. But I am instructed that this reclamation of your vows may be carried on in a civil court. If this be practicable, you may yet be free, and I shall be happy. Do not hesitate for resources. I am able to supply them. If you do not fail in resolution, I have no doubt of our ultimate success. Ours I term it, for I shall not know a moment's peace till you are emancipated. With the half of my yearly allowance, I have bribed one of the domestics, who is a brother to the porter of the convent, to convey these lines to you. Answer me by the same channel. It is secret and secure. You must, I understand, furnish a memorial, to be put into the hands of an advocate. It must be strongly worded, but remember, not a word of our unfortunate mother. I blush to say this to her son. Procure paper by some means. If you find any difficulty, I will furnish you. But, to avoid suspicion, and too frequent recurrences to the porter, try to do it yourself. Your conventual duties will furnish you with a pretext of writing out your confession. I will undertake for its safe delivery. I commend you to the holy keeping of God, not the God of monks and directors, but the God of nature and mercy. I am your affectionate brother, Juan de Monçada. Such were the contents of the papers which I received in fragments and from time to time by the hands of the porter. I swallowed the first the moment I had read it, and the rest I found means to destroy unperceived as I received them, my attendance on the infirmary entitling me to great indulgences. At this part of the narrative the Spaniard became so much agitated, though apparently more from emotion than fatigue, that Melmoth entreated him to suspend it for some days, and the exhausted narrator willingly complied. End of chapter 5, part 5.